So we're now recording. Hopefully the last. Same thing if you're watching the video, same thing as always. Write down the attendance words, take a screenshot when I say the attendance words. The last attendance word is going to be me asking you a question, or you asking me a question about the material. For you, if you're on the video, first attendance word will be, let me think. Marine Corps will be the first word for attendance. I guess that's 2 words, but call it the attendance phrase. It's 7:36, so you can skip ahead about 25 minutes if you want to, and that's when the lecture will actually start.
Oh, by the way, hold on. You asked me about my parents' stuff, and I asked my mama, and she just told me I forgot to tell you. My mother was not stationed or deployed, but she was stationed in PI.
Okay.
Her unit in Illusion, I can't believe she was not
Can't
deployed. Yeah. I'm out of it, I'm tired today. My father though was medically discharged from dying right after the MOS school.
Okay.
So that's basically all.
I wonder if your mom was in Paris Island around the same time I was there, or at least in Beaufort. Or your dad, for that matter. I mean, for boot camp.
Perhaps. You said Beaufort?
Yeah, that's what Paris Island is.
I don't remember what
That's where I was stationed when I was not overseas.
my grandfather lives down there too. He's also he's a recruiter.
Okay.
Charles Room. Have you ever heard of that?
I don't think so. It doesn't ring a bell, but I'm also losing my memories too. Here. Carter is here. You know, you could plug that in front of your computer. That should work. I was just thinking because,
I didn't see that.
you know, getting bad with names, but the gentleman who's got his little wheelie thing, so sometimes that's in his way. Is it working for you?
Yeah, it works.
Okay. Today's my anniversary
That's cool.
of the day I went to Paris Island, or arrived. I guess technically I left on September 7th. Yeah, September 8th. My life was never the same. Let's see. Start recording. Morning. Morning. Good morning. Have a good weekend. Anything exciting? That was good news. Saw my college football team move up on another team. It was nice after last year's display of, well, plus University of Florida lost, which I always appreciate. You guys probably don't get that hatred, so you're not from there, but it's a hatred that runs deep. Not as bad as Miami, though. Rudest fans I've ever been with. Did anybody travel this weekend? No? Good morning.
Morning.
WVSU won this weekend, right?
28-14.
Really wish I could have seen you. I think I'm done traveling for a while. I like to travel, but I'm also exhausted. But everybody likes to turn things in over the weekend, so don't work on weekends. Mondays really suck. This Monday really sucks. Oh yeah, speaking of the football game or anything else, this is a reminder. If you attend any official university event that you don't have to attend, might as well take some pictures of yourself there, send them to me, and I'll probably give you extra credit. Generally, that's what I do, but I can't announce it every time there's a university event because there's just so many of them. So yeah, if you find yourself at something, take some pictures, so some proof. Preferably with WVSU gear on, because then you get more points, and send them to me. When's your next game?
This week's our bye week, and then next Saturday, go to Wisdom.
See, I'd like to go to that game. I got in touch with somebody in the athletic department and said, hey, if you guys need tutors for the bus ride or the van ride or whatever, I'd be willing to go with you for some of the games. You guys staying in Buchanan for the night or just going there and coming back? Or When you do stay at places, do you ever get to see the place, or is it just like, all right, you go to the hotel in the morning, wake up, we're leaving?
It really depends on where, because we go to West Florida this year,
Okay.
and we're going to do some stuff.
See, oh, that's the one I need to go. Okay.
But like, yeah, for the first game, Carson Newman, the hotel.
Yeah.
Me and them 6 afternoon. Wake up, go, food.
Yeah. That's Florida. Fun stuff. It's been a fun year to watch the Florida college teams so far.
Yeah, you see it.
It was so fun to watch. I always love to see the Gators lose, especially like that in the swamp. What? One time I've ever been to a game there was my team lost. When Tim Tebow was playing. Apparently he had broken his hand that game. We didn't find out until it was over.
Okay, but it's they were great. That's what I'm saying. Like they're still right.
All right, we've got less than a minute, so I'll start attendance here slowly. Got to slow it down because technically no one's late until after 8:01. If I finish attendance before then, it's not technically correct. So, from the top, Brumfeld, here. Here. Champion is here. Gorby is not here. Gross is not here. Dunker is here. Both of the Hills are here. Jackson is not here. Keys is here. Perez is here. Sigmund is not here. Slaughter is here. Smith is not here. Stover is here. I'm trying to go slow. Tompkins is here, right? Yeah, Tompkins is here. Vanest is not here. Watson is not here. Young is here. Wyback is here. Lawrence is not here. Carter is here. Sigmund, right? Sigmund is here. Is there anybody I didn't call? It's not 8:01 yet, so we won't get started yet. And once it turns to 8:01, I'll once again call out who's not here for the video. So I can go back to a replay if needed. Oh, it's 8:01. So again, the list of people who are not here. Gorby, Gross, Jackson, Smith is here now. Good timing. Vanest, Watson, Lawrence, and again, that's the list of people who are not here, right? Everybody's been called. It's 8:01. Let's get moving. All right, so announcements and reminders. Again, speaking of attendance, it is mandatory. It's graded. If you come in late, you should take the words because, you know, at that point, your grade is based on how many of the attendance words you get. What else? If you've missed some days, which is all right, if I was able to record it, you should be able to go back and watch the recording so you get your points. Also, get the material that you missed. As always, if you're watching this as a video, so not a live stream, I don't think anybody's live streaming with us anyway right now. Yep, that's correct. Nobody's live streaming. But anyway, if you're watching the video, as usual, not only will you need to write down the words, but you will need to take screenshots when I say the words. Today's first word for attendance will be Paris, but with 2 R's instead of 1. Don't misspell it. Paris, 2 R's instead of 1. Parris is the first word for attendance. Anyway, any questions about attendance? Again, the mandatory part, that's out of my hands, right? That's from the university. They make me turn in the attendance. But for those of you who are not here the first day of class, I'll remind you, the reason it's graded is because all these semesters, all these years I've been doing this, last year was the only year I didn't have graded attendance, and it just sucked. People were failing, their grades sucked. Obviously, they couldn't get the boost from the attendance grades, failing exams, missing exams. Speaking of which, let me go ahead and skip ahead. The exam is due on Sunday. You have to do the exam. It's open now. It's due on Sunday. You have 50 minutes to take 50 multiple choice questions. If you want more time than that, meet me online. Like, let's find a time to meet online. If I can proctor your exam, and I know you're taking a closed book exam, you're not using the internet or notes, I don't care how long it takes you to do it. And generally, I don't like to work on the weekends, but if it's a proctoring an exam, it's easy. Because all I need is for you to be online where I can see you and hear you. And then I'll just have my camera off and I'll just go about my business. I can help cook, every once in a while glance and make sure you're not cheating. So, whenever you need to do the proctor, let me know, maybe we can do it. So again, 50 minutes, and I'm saying it now, I'm gonna say it a lot. There's gonna be a few people who are gonna miss the deadline, but I didn't know the exam was on Sunday. I'm telling you now, that's my prediction. I hope I'm wrong. This will be the first time I'm wrong, but someone's gonna miss it. Anyway, your study guides are the quizzes. And remember, quizzes are extra credit. So you can go in there and take those quizzes over and over again. It won't affect your grade one way or the other. Until the end of the semester, when I'll go in and count all your points that you did get and add them as extra credit. So it will never hurt your grade, but go in there, take those quizzes. Not only will you get exposure to some of the questions that will be on the exam, but it'll give you that practice because the format of answering the questions, those multiple choice questions on WVSU Online, that's exactly what the exam is going to be like. So get in there and do those quizzes. Great extra credit. What else? All right. Anyway, backing up here. I'm still catching up on grading. As you guys know, I traveled this weekend, so I didn't really work this weekend, which means I have a lot of grading to do. So bear with me. Also, just so you guys know, since I get to see you every, 3 times a week, I always prioritize my 8-week classes when it comes to grading and emails. Because they don't get to see me, and it's online, and it's in a rush, right? So I always prioritize getting their stuff graded and returning their emails. It's not that I like them more than you. It's just that they're in a more of a time crunch. Lab 2 is past due. Officially, if you remember, the syllabus says no late work is accepted. Unofficially, I'm saying if you missed it, go ahead and turn it in. Again, going back to what I was saying on prioritizing stuff. I always prioritize new stuff, but once I get caught up with new stuff, I'll go back and grade, corrections or late work. So go ahead and turn it in if you missed it. And I promise I'll try my best to get it graded. Or even if you need help doing it, meet me online. I know it's past due, but that doesn't mean that you're like, hey, can you help me online or meet me online and help me do this? I'll gladly do it. So let me know. Pre-lab 3 is past due. I don't know what happened. This week we have more people missing it than previous weeks. You should feel like you should be getting more into the groove of it by now, not less into the groove of it. But yeah, if you missed it, whatever, come to lab. You'll just be in that 5th group that doesn't do the experiments, but you can watch and you'll get the data. So yeah, any questions about pre-lab? Okay, obviously lab, as always, will be Wednesday from 9 to 10:50. Make sure you wear closed-toed shoes and pants. Pre-lab 4 is due on Friday. So I'm going to remind you again every time we meet. And again, people are going to miss it. The pre-labs are always due on Friday. Pre-labs are always due on Friday. On Friday, pre-labs are always due. So, and again, let me know if you need help. It's not a test. I will sit there with you and read the pre-lab to you and make sure you understand this and say, hey, go ahead and answer these questions. And do you need help with it? I'm here to help you. So any questions about the announcements and reminders? Do any of you guys have announcements and reminders? All right, let's get moving then. So get back into it. So to remind you, right now we're talking about biological molecules. There's 4 main categories of biological molecules. There's carbohydrates, there's lipids, there's proteins, and there's nucleic acids. Right now, we're still talking about the first category, which is, just to be brief, carbohydrates. And also, by the way, those are in no particular order, so it's not that order, that order we have to put it in. Now, whoops, when it comes to, what's going on here? Sorry, let me fix this slideshow. There we go. Anyway, so again, so now we're talking about monosaccharides, we are talking about carbohydrates, which is the first category that we have to talk about. And under carbohydrates, there was 3 other subcategories. There was monosaccharides, which we're done talking about. And those are the monomers, right? There was disaccharides, which we're done talking about. And now finally, we're getting to the third and last category of carbohydrates, which is polysaccharides. So to remind you, for the exam, you're going to need to know the difference between carbohydrates and the other biological molecules. And then you also need to know the difference between the 3 different categories of carbohydrates. So monosaccharide, disaccharide, and polysaccharide. And again, when you think of carbohydrates, you should think of sugars. So whether we're talking about a monosaccharide, which is 1 sugar, or a disaccharide, which is 2 sugars put together, or polysaccharide, which is a bunch of sugars put together, it's still just sugars. So there we go. Another thing, this is a good reminder too, another thing that's going to be a common theme for the exam when we're talking about these biological molecules is you need to know their monomers and the polymers, right? So you already know that the monomer of a carbohydrate is a monosaccharide. We already talked about that. And now today I'm telling you that the polymer of a carbohydrate is called a polysaccharide. So there you go. Monomer is the monosaccharide and the polymer is the polysaccharide. Anyway, generally speaking, I think when people think of carbs and they're not in a biology class and someone says, hey, I need to get some carbs or I need to cut down on my carbs, or whatever, something like that, usually this is what they're thinking of. Polysaccharides is usually what people mean when they say carbs and they're not talking in a biological way. So this is what they are, right? Complex carbohydrates. If you download the PowerPoint, you can watch this animation of these monosaccharides, particularly the glucose, linking together. And of course, as you know by now, when you're bringing things together, that is a dehydration reaction. Now, there's a few different types of polysaccharides. I'm going to teach you 4 of them? Yeah, 4 of them. And you'll need to know the difference between them in the exam. So here's the first one, starch. Obviously, the first thing you need to know that is starch is a polysaccharide, which is a carbohydrate, right? So that's the first thing you need to know about starch. What is starch made up of? It's just a bunch of glucose monomers. You probably see a lot of note taking, which is great. So you probably don't necessarily need to write that first bullet point down as far as the exam is concerned, because as far as the exam is concerned, the 3 important ones that I'm going to test you on, the 3 different types of polysaccharides, they're all just a long string of glucose. So there's nothing unique, at least not when we just described it that way. Now you're going to learn that the way they're stringed together is different. But for the exam, that's irrelevant because this is a 100 level class, so I'm not going to get that deep into it. So yes, all 3 of them that I'm about to teach you are long strings of glucose monomers. What you do need to know is that starch is what plants use to store energy. So there'll probably be a multiple choice question where I say something like, which of these polysaccharides is used by plants to store energy? The answer will be starch. You don't need to know these examples. But yes, that is where potatoes and grains are a major source of starch. And again, a good little extra credit paper if you want to write about it, because that's pretty vague. Grains, what kind of grains? What are they? So you can look into that if you want. And it's biology too, so then you could really go off on a tangent. It has nothing to do with the carbohydrates necessarily, but you can look into where are the grains from. Oats, where are oats native to? Wheat, barley, where are all those things native to? Anyway, that's starch. One of the types of polysaccharides I'm teaching. Any questions about starch? Okay. Here's a picture of what the molecules look like. Actually, this is a real picture of starch granules, and then a drawing of what the molecule looks like. So you can see each one of these little things. That is the glucose. Happens to have that shape. We're going to come back and talk about that shape here in a second. But again, I'm not going to test you on that because it's 100 level class. But remember last week, I was mentioning this theme of form and function, right? So things have similar forms. A lot of times you can guess they probably have similar functions. It should be interesting because the next one I'm going to show you, because again, this is just starch. The second category I'm going to show you, similar, and even has a similar form, but slightly different. So as you might imagine, it has a similar function, but slightly different. So let's see if you can guess. Maybe not necessarily the name of it, but the one important thing that I want you to know about starch, remember, is that it's what plants use to store energy. So what do you think the next thing I'm going to tell you is about? Maybe not the name, but if the thing I just taught you now is what plants use to store energy. Any guesses what the next thing might be? What is it? I don't expect you to know. I'm just curious to see if anybody can guess it. To break this up so I'm not talking at you. I'd much rather have a conversation. I'll just give it to you then. It's glycogen. It's what animals use to store energy. So for the exam, that's the most important thing you need to know. Yes, it is stored mainly in the liver and the muscle cells. But again, for this 100 level class, I'm probably not going to ask you that. Or maybe I'll add it to the question. Like, this is used by animals to store energy, and it's stored mostly in the liver and muscle cells. Now, what our cells need, as you learned last week, and you're going to learn again later, this is going to be important later. Our cells need glucose. Our cells turn glucose into a form of energy that they can use. So that's why glycogen is useful, because it's the long string of glucoses. So it's like, oh, if we need some energy, let's break off some of those glucoses and put them to use. And that's what carbo loading is. I don't know if I think we have one person in this class who's a runner. Is there one of you, or is that another class? Yeah. Anyway, somebody here was either in the long distance running or at least 5Ks. But so a lot of times when people do long distance running, they'll eat a lot of carbs the night before so that their body can change the starch to glycogen, and then it's stored. And then when you're running, your body can use that to fuel your body. But anyway, yeah, again, for the exam, the most important thing is this circle thing right here. Glycogen is used by animals to store energy. And as far as storing energy is concerned, and polysaccharides are concerned, that's the end of the story, which is another good extra credit topic if you want to look into it. But I've only told you about plants and animals. What about fungi? What do they use to store energy? What about protists? What about bacteria? Obviously, it's not important for the exam or for the course, otherwise I would teach you. But you can look it up for extra credit work if you want. So any questions about glycogen? All right, the next one is not about energy, but it is about plants. It's called cellulose. It is the most abundant organic compound on Earth. I might ask you that, I'm not sure. So I'll put a question mark next to that. You definitely don't need to know this, but it's in the textbook, so I'm gonna explain it anyway. Cellulose forms these cable-like fibrils that are found in plant cell walls. So I haven't taught you this yet, but plant cells, unlike animal cells, have walls around them. And those walls are made up of cellulose, which is why it's the most important, abundant organic compound on Earth. Here's the interesting thing, not for the exam, and I guess these two, again, aren't very important, but it's still kind of interesting. You can't digest cellulose. Most animals cannot digest cellulose because we don't have the enzymes. I haven't taught you what an enzyme is yet, but they do all kinds of things, including digestion. So we don't have the proper enzymes to break down the cellulose, which is why it's actually healthy for us. This is what fiber is. Cellulose is fiber. And the reason that's healthy for you is because you can't digest it. You get these long strings of glucose molecules stuck together, and basically it just sweeps out your digestive system because you don't break it down. So at a molecular level, those are huge molecules that are just just sweeping through and cleaning everything out. So yeah, what's not written on here, which it should be, cellulose, because again, think about the exam. Cellulose is what plants use for structure. So if you're taking notes, you want to write that down. I should have added that to this slide. So again, to back up, starch is what plants use to store energy. Cellulose is what plants use for structure. Glycogen is what animals use to store energy. Now, this also goes back to, I saw this meme somewhere. Again, people, all this pseudoscience out there, people trying to scare you using science, like real science, is portrayed in the wrong way. First of all, let's be honest, fast food is garbage, right? For the most part, fast food is garbage, so I'm not trying to tell you should eat fast food. But this is also garbage, and I'll just stick with this one. So they're saying, do you know what's in your fast food? And see here, number 3, it says wood, parentheses, cellulose. And that's so misleading, because most likely, no, there's not wood in your fast food. But there is cellulose in wood. See, so what they're trying to do is like stretch the truth. They're trying to use a truth and bend it to lead you to the wrong conclusion. This is why courses like this is so important, and critical thinking is so important, because people are out there trying to trick you. Now, granted, whoever came up with this garbage probably had good intentions, because, like I keep saying, fast food is generally speaking not good for you. But yeah, cellulose is actually good for you. And yes, it is also found in wood, but it is also found in this lettuce, right, in that Big Mac. But anyway, also, if you wanted to, you could look at the rest of this stuff up for extra credit. Where else do we find L-cysteine? Because they're trying to scare you. Oh, it's in duck feathers and human hair. Well, where else? It's probably a normal place. Silicon dioxide, where else can you find it? Dimethyl polysiloxane, where else can you find it? All that stuff. If you want to look it up for independent work, excuse me, extra credit, feel free. Any questions about this? Okay, the next word for attendance has nothing to do with this slide, but it is island. Island is the next word for attendance. You know, like a body of land surrounded by water. Island. All right, here's what it looks like. See, again, just a bunch of glucose molecules linked together. But hopefully, you're looking at that, and hopefully in your brain you can remember what the other ones look like. And I think I do have a slide where they're all together so you can compare and contrast. But once again, you can see this is a very similar structure to the other ones, but if you remember, the other ones were kind of zigzag, and that just because of that little difference, we cannot digest this, right? So again, this is what makes it healthy for us. Just because it has that one change in the shape, therefore we can't digest it, right? So again, form and function. So any questions about cellulose? All right, there's one more to learn about, and it is called chitin. This one's a little bit different, because unlike the other 3 I taught you about, this one actually has nitrogen in it. The other ones were nothing but glucose molecules put together. Granted, they were put together slightly different ways, but it was still nothing but glucose molecules. And as far as we're concerned, chitin is just an arthropod exoskeleton. That's what it's used for. So again, starch is used for energy storage for plants. Cellulose is used for plant structure. Glycogen is used for animals to store energy. And then finally, chitin is used for the arthropod exoskeleton. And of course, an arthropod, I mean, this pretty much covers it, right? You've got crabs, lobsters, things like that, insects, arachnids. Basically, as far as we're concerned, anything with an exoskeleton. So, any questions about that? All right, here is a table I made up. It's not in your textbook, but it's really good for studying because, again, there's going to be questions where you need to differentiate between the 4. So this is all that information in one little slide. So if you're studying for Sunday's exam, it wouldn't hurt you to look at this slide on the PowerPoints because it tells you, right? It describes them, describes what they do. So, yeah. Any questions? All right, so the next slide I'm going to show you was the one I was talking about. It shows you, no, it doesn't show you chitin, but it shows you starch, glycogen, and cellulose. So again, you can see how like starch and glycogen are very similar. The only difference is, as far as looking, you can see that instead of one zigzaggy thing, it's one zigzaggy thing that also happens to branch out, which makes sense. And then you have this, right, which is, again, just glucose molecules, but it's just nice and straight. So even without knowing chemistry or biology, you could just look at this and be like, all right, these 2 things must do something similar to each other, and this third thing must be completely different. right? And you would be correct in guessing that, right? Because these both are for energy storage, and that is for structure. Form and function. Any questions about that? Okay, that's also the last slide for carbohydrates. So any questions about carbohydrates in general before we move on to the next one? All right, the next one, lipids. Before we really get into lipids, that reminds me there's one more thing I need to tell you about carbohydrates that I didn't tell you, and I apologize. The carbohydrates are hydrophilic, meaning they're water-loving, meaning if you mix them with water, they won't repel each other, they'll mix together. As a matter of fact, usually water will break it down, right? So you could, mix sugar and water to make simple syrup, it'll dissolve. That's what hydrophilic is. Does anybody know the opposite of hydrophilic? Certainly someone does. I think I'm just being shy again.
Hydrophobic.
There you go, thank you. Hydrophobic is correct. Oops. Okay, there we go. Lipids are hydrophobic. Yes. So, as you might imagine, before I even put the bullet points on there, it's the opposite, right? So it does not dissolve in water, you could probably guess, and it is not polar. They're not polar molecules, therefore they do not dissolve in water. And the common example is what you see in that picture right there, oil and vinegar, right? It does not mix. Now granted, if you're using it as a salad dressing, you might take the bottle and shake it up, and it looks like it's mixed, but at the molecular level, it's not mixed. That's called emulsification. What you really have is little beads of oil suspended in the vinegar. But at the molecular level, it's not mixed. So, any questions so far about lipids? All right, and skipping ahead, just so you know, right, so I already told you carbs are hydrophilic. Obviously, lipids are hydrophobic. You're going to learn about some other ones. For example, amino acids, as you're going to learn, proteins, could be hydrophilic or could be hydrophobic, depending on which type they are. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. And nucleic acids themselves have different parts of them. So some parts of them are hydrophobic, and some parts of them are not. Anyway, any questions? All right, another thing that makes lipids unique from the other three categories that we're going to talk about is that they're not technically macromolecules, right? They're not these big ones. And remember I told you a common theme in this section is going to be monomer and polymer, right? For this exam, you need to know what the monomer is and what the polymer is. Remember, a monomer is what builds a polymer, and it's the repeating parts. So the starch we just saw was just a bunch of glucose molecules put together. Now granted, lipids are made up of smaller parts, but they're not repeating the same small parts. So technically, they're not monomers. I'm not going to get that deep in the exam, just explaining it. So you still need to know the parts of these lipids for some of them, but just so you know, they're not technically monomers and they're not technically polymers. Yeah. So anyway, any questions so far? All right. So just like when we were talking about carbohydrates, there were different types of carbohydrates. Same with lipids. So you're going to need to know the difference between these two different types of lipids. Here's the first one. It's a fat or a triglyceride. I think this is what most people think of when they think of lipids, fats. So all this big gut I have right now, because I don't have time to work out anymore, that's lipids. And just like you needed to know that starch is made up of a bunch of glucose and that cellulose is made up of a bunch of glucose, you also need to know what lipids are made up of. The lipids are made up of a glycerol molecule with 3 fatty acids. That'll make a lot more sense when I show you a picture of it. Glycerol molecule with 3 fatty acids. And I've already kind of introduced you unofficially to fatty acids when we first started this section of the chapter. When I was talking about octane, and it's a big long molecule, it has a lot of energy, and I showed you pictures of fats, so that's what that is, right? A fatty acid is a long, energy-rich molecule. As a matter of fact, not that you need to know this, but it has 2 times the energy of a carbohydrate. Again, not that you need to know that. So I was hoping somebody would ask, and no one did. But when I told you that glycogen was used by animals to store energy. I was hoping somebody would say, well, what about fat, right? Because prior to learning this, in my mind, when I thought about animals storing energy, all I thought about was fat. So yes, that is another way that animals store energy is fat. When we say fat, I'm talking about this gut. That's called adipose cells. I'm gonna put a question mark next to that. I'm pretty sure I'm not gonna ask you about what adipose cells are, but just in case, when you think of adipose, you should think of fat cells. So that's what fat is. Any questions? So far, we're still gonna talk a little bit more about triglycerides. All right, so again, for the exam, not that I like to teach to the exam or anything, but some things you need to know for this slide is you need to know the fat is a triglyceride, right? So if you were to make a flashcard, you got fat on one side, triglyceride on the other. Another thing you need to know is what it's made up of. Again, it's a glycerol molecule with 3 fatty acids attached. Hence the name triglyceride. Actually, it could have been a better name, but I didn't make the names up. Anyway, if you don't have any questions, if you download this PowerPoint, this shows how they come together. So here's the glycerol molecule. Here's the 3 fatty acid molecules. They each attach in a dehydration reaction, right? Anytime we're bringing things together, it's a dehydration reaction. And this is what it looks like. This is a picture that's not from your textbook. This is from the old textbook. Then again, here's the glycerol molecule, excuse me. And here's just one of the fatty acids attaching. Again, dehydration reaction. And here's the end product. Now, I will point this out. This is going to come back a little bit later. They don't all look like this, right? So here I am showing you this picture of a fatty acid that's this long, and the next one's this long, and they're both straight. Then this one's curved right there, and it curves down. That's not always the case. They can come together in all kinds of different ways, and that'll be the topic of discussion here soon, shortly. So don't think that this is what they all look like. They all have the glycerol molecule. They all have 3 fatty acids. The fatty acids is where they vary. Different lengths, different branching patterns. That will be important here in a few minutes because, like I said, there's this theme between form and function, right? So the shape of these things actually does make a difference. So any questions about this picture? All right, so what do you think the purpose of fat is? And we already talked about one of them, so hopefully someone can at least remember what we said 3.5 minutes ago. There's 3 main purposes for fat on your body. What do we use fat for? Any guesses? And again, we just talked about one of them. No guesses? All right, I'll give you a hint. Again, I got a little belly going right now. Maybe bigger than little. The reason I have this belly is because I'm taking in more calories than I'm burning. So my body is doing what with those extra calories? Storing them for what? Energy, good, yes. Storing it for energy. But they could also do some other stuff. And here's a hint for the other one. Think about non-human animals. So other animals might store that fat also for energy, but what else? If you're an animal that's not human, I'm not gonna say which one, there's a lot of different ones. What's some other purposes that it might help to be nice and fat? Other than storing energy?
Warmth.
Good. Insulation. And then there's one more. This one's a little bit less obvious. And the picture I'm going to show you is going to really make it obvious. But the bottoms of your feet are a little bit soft, right? Well, depending on your foot, but most people, it's not like bone because there's fat there. Why would you need fat at the bottom of your feet? Or why would you need fat on your butt? Last one. No one's going to guess it? Cushioning. Right, so those are the 3 functions of fat. Energy storage, cushioning, and insulation. I believe it was Darwin who first said, it's more cushion for the cushion. That wasn't actually him. Don't quote me on that. But yes, do know those 3 functions. All right, let's make things even more complicated for you. So again, this big conversation is about biological molecules in general, and then we focused in on one of the 4, which are lipids. And then under that, there's different types of lipids, and right now we're currently talking about fats or triglycerides. And now I'm going to break it down even more. When we're talking about fats and triglycerides, I'm going to tell you that there's 2 basic subdivisions of those. Does anybody know what they are? And you've heard these words before, I'm sure. I was curious if they'll pop into your brain right now. The two different types of fat. Think about, don't think about a biology class. Think about a nutrition class, or when you're shopping and you're looking at labels. You might know the two different types of fats. All right, we don't have time to guess, so here we go. Unsaturated and saturated. You need to know the difference between them. Before I even go through all these bullet points, here's the basic answer. Well, first of all, does anybody know, forget fats, does anybody know what the term saturated usually means anyway? Like if I went for a run, which again, haven't done for a while, and I came back and I'm all sweaty, and I said, man, my shirt is saturated with sweat. What do I mean by that?
So,
Yeah, it's soaked, right? My shirt, if I meant it, if it was true, if I said it was saturated with sweat, that means it literally cannot absorb anymore, right? It's as much as it can take. That's what this means too, but not with sweat. So when we're talking about fats, when we say it's saturated, what we mean is it's saturated with those hydrogen atoms. So you need to know that for the exam. If it's saturated, it has all the hydrogen atoms it could. It's saturated with hydrogen atoms. If it's unsaturated, and really I should flip those. That's kind of confusing. Make sure, sorry about this horrible picture, because we're talking about unsaturated, but the picture is here. And then we talked about saturated, but the picture is here. So don't let that confuse you. I apologize. But anyway, yeah, if it's unsaturated, it does not have all the hydrogens that it could. That actually gets important when we talk about form and function. Because what happens with these unsaturated fats is some of these carbons have double bonded with themselves. And because they've double bonded with themselves, and as you should know from the last lab, carbons can only bond 4 times, right? So if they've double bonded with themselves, that's a bond that they couldn't have for hydrogen. And because of that, it changes the shape. And that will be important here in a second. Or let me ask you this. Imagine we literally had those molecules, and they were not the size of molecules, but they were this big. Imagine if I could just pick this thing up like this and put them on this table. Which one do you think would be easier to stack up really high? A bunch of saturated fats or a bunch of unsaturated fats? Saturated, perfect. And why is that? Because they look like they were fit together, right? It's a nice flat thing. It's a bunch of flat things on top of each other. And that is actually why unsaturated fat is healthier for you than saturated fat. Because molecularly, it does the same thing. Unsaturated fats, because they're nice and flat, and they don't have any curves in them, they just stack on top of each other. And when they do that, they clog your arteries. So that's why saturated fat in general is unhealthy for you. Also, again, I'm going to back it up here for a second to remind you, they don't always look like this. So, right, this is an example of an unsaturated fat. Not all unsaturated fats have that exact shape. They all have at least one kink in them, but it could be, maybe the kink starts here. Maybe it starts there. Maybe the molecule is shorter. Maybe the molecule is longer. Maybe there's 2 kinks in it, right? So the shape is, you have all these different types of shapes. So it's not like they're all like that. Of course, like going back to my analogy earlier, if we had a bunch of these that were that same exact shape, yeah, we could probably stack those. But they're not always that same exact shape. They have different variations. But anyway, just so you know, it's not in the textbook, so I don't think I'm going to ask you on the exam. But when you think of animal fats, you should think of unsaturated, saturated fats. You should think of the unhealthy ones, saturated fats, and mostly in animal. Now, of course, there's always exceptions. And I'm not saying don't eat meat, because we need things like protein. There's other things you can get from meat. But yes, generally speaking, animal fats are unhealthy. Unlike plant and fish fats, generally speaking, they are high in unsaturated fat. So they're generally speaking healthier for you. Tropical plants are the exception. I will put it next to this because, like I was saying in this previous slide, I'm probably not going to ask you any of this stuff. But if I do, I'm definitely not going to get that deep into it. Like, which one are plant fats liquid or solid at room temperature? I'm not going to ask you any of that stuff. But again, if anything, just know that you should generally associate plants with unsaturated, healthier fats. And generally speaking, when it comes to animals, you should associate that with saturated unhealthy fats, generally speaking. This is another thing that's not in your textbook, and I'm definitely not going to test you on. This is just an example. If you look at corn oil versus palm oil versus butter, it gives you an example of the different percentages of the different types of fat that are in them. And I haven't even talked about polyunsaturated versus monounsaturated. I'll get into that a little bit here in a second, but I'm not going to test you on it. Again, 100 level course, we won't go that deep. And again, I'm definitely not going to ask you to memorize any of this. If anything, for an exam, I might give you this picture and say, which of these three oils has the most saturated fat by percentage? And then hopefully you can just look at this and say, oh yeah, butter, right? You should be able to decipher some pie graphs. So any questions about that slide? All right. Something else I'm definitely not going to talk to you or test you on, but it's in the textbook and this is good for your everyday life, so we'll talk about it. Food manufacturers often convert unsaturated fats to saturated fats, right? So these things, they'll take this fat, this fatty acid, that's not saturated with all the hydrogens it could be, and convert it to a saturated, right? As you might imagine, that process is called hydrogenation, right? Because you're adding hydrogens to it. They do this for a reason. First of all, it keeps it from spoiling quickly. And of course, if you're a food manufacturer, that helps, right? So you can say, hey, if you buy my foods, it lasts longer than their foods. It's also good for frying. It's also solid, usually solid at room temperature, which is helpful for different reasons. But on a bad note, it can create something called trans fats, and we won't even get into that for this 100 level course. Basically, long story short, trans fats are very bad for your health. A lot of times they're found in margarine and certain peanut butters, and it increases the bad cholesterol in your bloodstream. But again, as far as the exam is concerned, this is a very unimportant slide. So I'm going to move through it. Same with this one. Good for your everyday life. You should know this for your everyday life, but I'm not necessarily going to test you on. Mostly when I say something's important in this course anyway, it's because it's important to understand what comes later in the semester. So this information, for example, is very important for your everyday life. If you forget it, it's not going to hurt you later in the semester. This is just like a little side bit of information. We're not going to build on this. Anyway, I'm sure you've heard of these terms before. Omega-3 fatty acids, they're very healthy. It's what's called an essential fatty acid. It's called essential, one, because it's required, and two, because we can't make it ourselves. So sort of like those, when we're talking about the different elements in the body, right? We have those essential elements because, well, those are elements, we have to eat them. Anyway, we'll leave it at that for now. We'll come back to that idea. So again, it's an essential fatty acid. We have to get it through our diet because we can't produce it ourselves. It's healthy. It reduces heart disease. It reduces arthritis symptoms. It reduces irritable bowel syndrome symptoms. And it's mostly found in oily fish and nuts. Nuts like walnuts, pecans, things like that. Any questions about this? Relatively unimportant slide as far as the exam is concerned. All right, here's one that is important. So now I'm telling you again, we're still talking about fats, talking about different types of fats. You do need to know this one. So another type of fat, fat, are fat phospholipids. The reason they're important is because this is what makes up our membranes. So the thing that's on the outside of our cells, right, basically defines the cell. Like, sure, the cell has everything that's in it, but without that membrane, you just have a bunch of stuff out in space. But yeah, phospholipids are important. This is what our cell membranes are mostly made of. Now, granted, there are other things incorporated into our cell membrane. You're going to learn that in the next chapter. But for now, we'll just leave it at that. The interesting thing about them is they're hydrophobic and hydrophilic. And I wish I had a picture. Your textbook does. But if that was one, let's see. Here we go. This is a really bad picture. Let's say that's one line of phospholipids. You have another line here. There we go. Such a bad drawing. Not that I can draw to begin with, but it's even harder with a mouse. So what we have on the outside of ourselves, and we're going to dive into this much more later, but for now, just know that they're phospholipids. What it's actually called, that you'll need to know later, it's called a phospholipid bilayer, because there's two of them. And again, part of it is hydrophobic, part of it's hydrophilic. The hydrophilic parts are attracted to each other, and that's what keeps them together. Also, that'll be important later in the semester when we start learning about diffusion and osmosis and things coming in and out of cells, because this is part of what dictates what can come in and out of cells. So that's going to be an important topic later. So any questions about phospholipids? All right. So this picture is not from your textbook. This is from the old textbook, but it's a nice way to kind of summarize everything into one picture other than the phospholipids. When we're talking about dietary fats, the triglycerides, the saturated versus unsaturated, trans and omega-3, this is all right there in one nice big picture, right? Saturated fats, generally unhealthy, generally found in animals. Unsaturated fats, generally but not always healthy, generally found in plants and fish. And of course, trans fats also fall under unsaturated fats, and trans fats are actually quite unhealthy. Anyway, that's just a summarization, so I won't ask you to have any questions. So that brings us to the next type of lipid. So remember, again, this whole conversations, we're talking about biological molecules. We're done talking about carbohydrates. We finished that discussion today. We're currently talking about lipids, and we're currently done talking about fats, right? So we're done talking about fats. That's one type of lipid. Now there's another type of lipid that you need to know. Well, two different types, actually. Steroids. Steroids are a type of lipid. You need to know that. Obviously, they're hydrophobic because they are a lipid. So you don't necessarily need to write that down. It's just a good reminder to tell you that, for the most part, lipids are hydrophobic. And I said for the most part because remember, phospholipids we just talked about, that one molecule, part of it is hydrophobic, part of it is hydrophilic. Now, steroids are different from fats. It's the one, they're different from the things we just talked about, both in their structure and obviously therefore their function. So you don't necessarily need to write down what I'm about to show you. I'm going to describe the structure, but then I'll show you a picture. And I'm not going to test you on this, right? I'm not going to ask you these things. But a steroid is made up of a carbon skeleton of 4 fused rings. And again, I'll show you a picture eventually. And hopefully you remember what we talked about last week. There's these things called functional groups, which are like molecules stuck on other molecules. And those functional groups kind of dictate what these molecules do. So for steroids, there's different types of steroids. And what makes them the different type of steroid is their functional group. So they're defined by their functional group. There's a picture, right? There's your basic steroid skeleton. Now what they're not showing on this picture is those different functional groups. But what I'm getting at here is all steroids basically look like this, some variation of this. There are other things sticking off of these, and right, depending on what is sticking off of it, will determine what type of steroid it is. But yeah, that's the basic design. I might show you a picture of this on the exam. What I won't do is give you something tricky like 4 rings that have a different shape, right? Say, which one of these is it? And they all look similar to this. It'd be more like me showing you a bunch of other completely different molecules and then something that looks like this, right? So I'm not going to get that tricky, just so you know. So any questions about basic steroids? We still have to get a little bit more into it. We're not done talking about steroids yet, but that's the basic information. All right, I'm going to give you an example of the most common steroid, cholesterol. Cholesterol is a type of steroid. You should know that for the exam. And you're going to need to know that later in the semester. Cholesterol is a key component of cell membranes. Of course, as you know from what I just said like 5 minutes ago, our cell membranes are made up of those phospholipids. It's mostly what it's made of, but also now you know there's also cholesterol in there, and they have an important function that we don't even have time to talk about. Also, cholesterol is the base steroid. So when your body creates all these different steroids, it uses basically cholesterol as the template, and then makes changes to it. So 2 examples of estrogen and testosterone. So what do you think of when you think of estrogen? Or let me rephrase that. If you had to summarize the big difference between estrogen and testosterone in like one simple sentence, what would it be? Surely you guys have heard these terms before. What's the difference between estrogen and testosterone from what you know, even without studying it? Basically, the stuff you probably heard growing up. How would you describe that in one sentence? No one wants to guess? All right, let's just make it even easier then. Which one of those is more associated with females, estrogen or testosterone? Good. So we'll leave, right? Hold on, let me fix this. It's trying to kick me off the recording. Couldn't wait 5 minutes. There we go. So yeah, go back up there. Yeah, anyway, yes, estrogen and testosterone. These pictures are not from your textbook, this is from the old textbook. You can see though how similar they are, right? Here, this is testosterone, it has a double bonded oxygen. This one has an oxygen that's bonded to a hydrogen. Then here, we have, where's the other difference? Oh yeah, same here. Here, we have a single bonded oxygen, it's also bonded to a hydrogen. And here on the estrogen, we have a double bonded oxygen. And that's it. That small difference makes amongst other things, makes the difference between a male and a female. So it just shows you how, small differences in molecules can make a big difference. But anyway, obviously I'm not going to test you on those the shapes of those things, but yes, do know that cholesterol is the base steroid. Any questions about cholesterol? All right, when you think of steroids, if you were in a biology class, what would you think of? This is interesting because I usually get two different answers. What do you guys think of when you think of steroids? You're not sitting in a boring biology class at 8 in the morning.
Like stuff that would be like get stronger.
Yeah, stuff to help you get stronger. And that's also not in the textbook, but really quickly we'll talk about it. I'm not going to test you on it. Surely you know a lot of this stuff. Synthetic anabolic steroids, right? Those help you get stronger, help you get bigger. They mimic some of the effects of actual steroids. They're also used to treat diseases. Like if you have disease that's making you get smaller in a bad way, then that's what it's used to help counter that. But again, as you know, it's been abused before. Let's see. The last word for attendance will be South Carolina. When we get back on Wednesday, hopefully we'll finish this discussion about biological molecules, because then in lab, you're going to be learning about it. So that's it. And don't forget, actually, technically, the last word for attendance is not a word at all. It's asking me a question about the material presented in this lecture. If you came in late, make sure you email me, right? If you came in on time, you don't have to email me. If you came in late, technically you're absent. So I need you to email me and say, hey, came in late. I think you guys, what you did before was perfect. Just like an email behind it was perfect. Thank you.
You're going back home.